Well, welcome to today's rant. As usual, got a target-rich environment. We've got so many things we could talk about, but instead, I'm going to try to focus on one thing: the deep state. What is it? You hear that term all of the time in the news now, and many people don't have a clue what they're talking about. So we're going to try to define the deep state and just mention a few things about it. I did some TV programs yesterday. We taped them with our friend Don Brown, who I think had just a most powerful presentation of what the deep state is, how it has come into being, the power that it is usurping, and how it is hindering and thwarting many things. Just all of the important issues that I think we need to understand about the deep state, which is one of the biggest threats to our republic right now. I would put it right up there with judicial tyranny. And I think there are three major threats to our republic, and two of them are judicial tyranny and the deep state. And we're going to talk about those later. At some point, we'll talk about the third. Now, I think all of these are going to be undone. I believe there's, I think the main ingredients for understanding this and for addressing it, we have the people in place. I think we have some people in place with the courage to do it. Not many, but some, and I think there will be more. So first we want to talk about, what is the deep state? And I'm going to give you a definition. It's kind of a basic definition, but this is derived from those programs that Don and I did, which I'm hoping this is going to inspire you to watch on MorningStar TV. We'll be posting them over the next few weeks. I'm going to be sharing some of the basics that are on them, but to me, you really need to watch the program and the full presentation. But hopefully this is something that's going to inspire you to do that. Okay, what is the deep state? The deep state is basically the bureaucrats in our country that are illegally and unconstitutionally making laws by imposing regulations that have not been passed or approved by our Congress, which is the Congress is the only constitutional branch with the authority to make law. The executive branch doesn't have it. It can, submit laws to Congress. It has executive power to run the executive branch of government, but it cannot make law. But many presidents have been trying to do an end run around the Constitution, doing what is in fact unconstitutional by making an end run around the Congress. One of the main ways they've been doing this is using what is called the deep state, the bureaucrats, who impose regulations that effectively either make law or they change, hinder, or thwart the laws that Congress has passed. They have basically become a law unto themselves, using regulations through all of the different bureaus and agencies in our government. And I believe the Supreme Court has been complicit in this very unconstitutional crisis that we now have in our country that is threatening our very republic. And we have a few hundred elected officials in our federal government. We've got 3 million bureaucrats in the federal government. And one of the things that we've seen examples of their work, our Congress passes a law like the Obamacare. comes out 3,000 pages. Nobody's read it. Nobody knows everything that's in it. It's mostly written by staff members or whoever they drew in to write this. And then, after the 3,000 page law, I think it's actually 2,700 pages, but nearly 3,000 page law, we within weeks have 50,000 pages of code and regulations imposed on our healthcare system in order to carry out or fulfill the original law. Now, many of the things that are in the code, that are in the regulations, you don't find in the law. You don't find a connection to them. And this is how they're becoming a law unto themselves. They're making the law of the land. They're enforcing their own yoke. I would say a yoke of slavery on the American people, imposing their own will. In some ways, it's just absolutely maddening, crazy regulations. Now, this is something that's got to be faced. And it's a basic military principle. You cannot defeat an enemy you do not see. You've got to see your enemy. You've got to understand your enemy if you're going to defeat them. This is one of the biggest enemies of the American Republic. This will unravel our republic if it's allowed to continue. We will not continue to have a constitutional republic. We are right now not functioning like a constitutional republic because of what is being done through the deep state, and also because of the way the Supreme Court has been complicit in this. Now, whether knowingly or just ignorantly or whatever, the Supreme Court has passed or affirmed things that support the deep state's ability to do this. And we'll get into that. We get into it. Don does a phenomenal job on these MorningStar TV programs we did on the deep state. And now I think the principles and the ways that this deep state has allowed to grow, become a cancer in our society, and it is a cancer. A cancer is defined as rebellious cells, independent cells who consume without regard to the rest of the body. The main purpose for a lot of bureaucrats is to increase the bureaucracy, not to serve the republic, not to serve the people, not to serve us, but to serve themselves and to grow the bureaucracy. It's grown to 3 million people. Guess what? This is something you'll find out. Our U.S. federal government, you cannot find anyone right now that even knows how many total bureaus and agencies there are in the government. That sounds crazy. That sounds bizarre. Check it out. That's how outrageous this has become. I remember I sat down with a few friends that had been in government for much of their life, to really understand it. I remember we spent a whole day just going over the agencies we could find, and we found out that maybe up to a third of them, we're not really doing anything except making wild, crazy regulations that they had no business or no authority to impose on the American people. Of the 2/3 that were left, it looked like they were canceling out what each other was doing. They were both doing, many agencies are doing the same job as other agencies, and because there's no coordination between them, they're conflicting with each other, and it's madness. How can you run anything like this? How did our government get here? Well, we need to see it because it creeps into every bureaucracy. I believe there are denominations that are now bureaucracies. I believe they're being run more by the deep state within that denomination than they are by the leadership of the denomination. They thwart the leadership. And we see Trump fighting this every step of the way. We see Obama using it. He worked with them to undermine the Congress, and in many cases undermine the Supreme Court. He only supported the Supreme Court when it agreed with him. Now, in these programs, now you can go to MorningStarTV.com. These programs will be listed in It'll be a couple of weeks before we get them up. I'm just sowing some seeds, maybe watering some seeds, but we cover in some depth what is the deep state. We go into a lot more explanation. Don does. What power does this deep state have? How does it get its power? And power is not the same thing as authority. We need to understand that. You can have the power to do something. Dictators have the power to impose their will, but they don't have legal authority to do it. And then we say, how is the deep state dangerous? It's one of the most dangerous threats to our everyday life that we have. Is the deep state constitutional? It's absolutely not constitutional. Don does a phenomenal job going to chapter and verse in the Constitution, showing you where this is a violation. And then, we've got to discuss. We do it on the program. What can we do? We with a couple of steps. What can we do? What can we do to help defeat and unravel this deep state from the increasing stranglehold it has on our nation? And we can do some things. We've got to do some things. We've got elected officials that understand it and have the courage to stand up to it. So we did these programs. I'm just doing this to touch on a few of the high points to encourage you to get these in depth. Don was laying out so much information so fast. We decided to break it up into a few programs so you could absorb it. And then we're going to post the whole thing together so you can take one part and then, stop and process it. Maybe search some things out. We've got to be like the noble Bereans who, when Paul the Apostle came preaching the gospel, they searched the scriptures to find out if these things were true or not. Check out these things. That'll help it go deeper. But, the deep state are unelected bureaucrats who are making their own law, imposing their own will, their own laws on our country. Under our Constitution, only the Congress has the authority to do that. The executive branch has to work with the Congress to develop, seek to pass laws and make law, change laws, but it doesn't have the authority to write law. That's the legislative branch alone. The judicial branch does not have authority to make law. Now, they've been doing, the executive branch of government has been usurping this authority only given to the Congress for a long time. Tragically, we're suffering under the results of this. There are many things done by many of our presidents were totally in conflict with the Constitution and the laws of the land. And then the judicial's been doing the same, legislating by the branch, determining what is legal and what is not legal. That was not the authority given to our Supreme Court. Our Supreme Court, sooner or later, we've got to face this, and this has got to be addressed, or we're going to continue to suffer under this judicial tyranny that we're suffering under right now. Judicial oppression. The Supreme Court of the United States does not have the authority to determine what is constitutional or not. I think because of their name, maybe, whatever, everybody started thinking they're the supreme law of the land. No, they are not. The Supreme Court was misnamed, in my opinion. It should have been called the High Court. It was meant to be the ultimate court of appeals. But nowhere in the Constitution is the Supreme Court given the authority to dictate or determine what is constitutional or not. If they ran into something that was brought before them that they felt was in conflict with the Constitution, it was their place to push it back to the Congress. Say, look, we think this is not constitutional. You need to fix this. But they could not determine from their bench what was to be enforced or not. They were just to determine the cases, the validity of the cases before them. Why was that? Why weren't they given the authority? Aren't they judges? Why weren't they given the authority to judge what is constitutional or not? Because our founders knew that they would use that authority to usurp the authority of the Congress, which is what they have in fact now done, and which they're doing it to our detriment, to our danger, to the very threat of our continuing as a republic. And so, the Supreme Court is one of the three branches mandated by the federal government. We have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the Supreme Court. It is a misunderstanding, it is a misinterpretation that there were three co-equal branches of government. Nowhere does it say that. It was not intended. In all the writings of the Founding Fathers, they made it clear they did not want three co-equal branches of government. Many people have the wrong impression that, well, how can they be checks and balances if they don't have co-equal authority? Easy. Following the Constitution. There was provision for that in the Constitution for them to check each other and balance each other, but they could not overrule each other. Nowhere was the judicial given the authority to overrule the Congress or the executive. Matter of fact, the way it was set up under our Constitution, the Congress was supposed to be the most powerful branch of government. Intentionally, because they felt that the Congress would be the most responsive to the people having to be elected every 2 years. And that's why they were alone given the power of the purse and the power of impeachment. No other branch of government was given that. The Congress alone can impeach judges who who go out of bounds, who start breaking the law by trying to make laws and actually violate the constitutional rights of the entire country by doing that. Every one of them that has done that should have been impeached. We just don't have the leadership in Congress with the courage to do what they're mandated to do and what they took an oath to do. They're in violation of their oath of office by not doing that. But the executive branch was not given the power of the purse, was not given the power of impeachment, neither was the judicial branch. It was the Congress. And the Congress, is the main branch of government that has had its authority and power eroded by usurping authorities in the executive and the judicial branches. What was supposed to be the most powerful branch of government is now the weakest by far. They even put out subpoenas and people laugh at them. Those in the FBI kind of laugh at them, sneer at them. So what are you going to do about it? We're not going to answer your subpoena. What are you going to do about it? I mean, they're the ridicule of our government now, and they're supposed to be the most powerful, and our republic will not work without them sitting and taking the authority they were given. Executive branch does the same thing. They laugh at the Congress. They got to work with them in some ways, but basically just roll right over them. It's because of the weak leadership in the Congress. And we've had times of very strong leadership in the Congress that pushed back on this and wouldn't allow it to happen. But for a long time now, we've had the weakest leadership of all in our Congress. So it's allowed this deep state, layer upon layer of bureaucrats who are doing nothing but making our lives miserable and untenable by crazy regulations. Now, there's some that are doing right and doing it legally. There are some bureaucrats that are saving our lives every day. We need a bureaucracy. We need bureaucrats. Every time you eat in a restaurant and don't die, thank a bureaucrat who came and inspected things and found, potential dangers for disease and things like that. Every time your house doesn't fall down, thank a bureaucrat. The inspectors and all. I mean, we have to have this form of government. It's just gotten way bigger than it should. Should be a tiny fraction of the size that it is, and then should have very defined, clear, authority and to do their jobs, the needed jobs, and should also be kept out of doing what is not their job. Now, one of the things, the unnecessary and unlawful, unconstitutional regulations just put on, developers and builders through the EPA, Environmental Protection. That was an agency used to put, I think, some of the worst and most onerous regulations on our country, bringing it to the point where it became a process 10 years long to get authority to just build a road in some places. It is madness. These things should have taken 10 minutes, at the very most 10 hours, instead 10 years. This is bureaucracy. Our immigration. Listen, our immigration system is broken. It takes you about 10 years. If you apply to get into our country and do it right, it takes you about 10 years. And why? Because bureaucracy run amok. Mismanagement, no management, or absolutely chaotic, insane management, running their own agenda with their own little fiefdoms, little kingdoms set up, trying to determine policy as they think it should be, not the way the legal constitutional process has formed it to be. All this has happened. But guess what? 97% of those 3 million, roughly 3 million bureaucrats just in the federal government cannot be fired. It's almost impossible to fire them. Through these public service unions and everything else that all need to be examined, what they've done to our country, you can't fire one of these guys. The first thing they do, it goes through a process. And it's a process that can involve even being able to appeal to the Circuit Court of Appeals. They're being fired, which could take 10 years to do. So they're sitting there in a job, doing nothing, getting paid for 10 more years. Exorbitant pay and benefits, doing nothing, just clogging up the system. Remember, a couple of days ago, we started talking about stewardship. This is the worst stewardship of a government, of any organization that I know of that could be found on the planet, except under communist regimes. This is what imploded the Soviet Union. The bureaucracy, the whole thing, it got so crazy that the whole system could not carry the weight of it. And the whole thing imploded. Well, the same thing can happen, believe it or not, in a free market society, because bureaucracy, not checked, not kept in its place, its useful place, and it has a useful place, a necessary place, but if it's allowed to grow like a cancer that grows without, where its main purpose is to grow, and it does so without regard to the rest of the body, will soon kill the whole body by consuming all the resources and everything else that is necessary to keep the body alive. And that's what's happening in our federal government. So I hope you enjoyed this encouraging rant today about the deep state. We've got a lot more to talk about. You're going to love these programs. You watch them on MorningStar TV. And I'm going to have them go ahead and post the unedited version of the whole thing that we recorded yesterday, Don Brown and I, just so you can go on there and, you can go through it at your own pace. Say you hit something you want to understand better, back it up. Watch it again. You can do that. The way we post these things on MorningStar TV, it's on-demand TV. So you can go there, look under Prophetic Perspectives, and you'll see the deep state being posted there. And I'll cover a few more in these rants too, because we've got to hit this thing every direction that we can if we're going to save things from where they are. And I believe that's going to happen. I believe there's a rising. I know last time I was on a White House call, they were, talking about how they had now canceled 22 regulations for everyone that has been passed under the Trump administration. And I think we've got to get to the point where that's way up in the hundreds for everyone. And we've got to get thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of unnecessary regulations and codes and everything else that are imposed on the American people, not only unnecessarily, but many of them are counterproductive to the entire free market system that we have. And it's not just about free markets, they're counterproductive to things like protecting the environment. Everything else. We've got to go through this, and then we've got to look at how this got done, and we've got to impose on the bureaucracy restrictions so that it never gets so far out as it has now and what it's been doing to our country. So I hope you've enjoyed this little brief on the deep state.